Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gimli Film Festival live stream. My name is Elizabeth Klinck, and I'm here today with a group of amazing filmmakers to talk a little bit about archive filmmaking. But before we start, I would like to acknowledge that the Gimli Film Festival resides on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Ashkenabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are privileged to be able to live, work, and play on this ancestral land. The name of our panel today is Remains of the Day, which I think is a wonderful title that the Gimli Film Festival came up with. It's a panel discussion on found footage and archival filmmaking. But before we get going, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, for sponsoring this panel and all of the free film screenings, panels, and masterclasses on the Gimli Film Festival live stream. So thank you very much. Also, as part of this panel, we are encouraging all of you who are watching at home to engage with our guests by asking questions or leaving comments in the live chat. You can find that chat box to the right or just below the video. And I'm going to get things started here with our guests, but feel free to ask as many questions as you can, and I'll get to as many of them as possible. Joining us today, we have a jam-packed panel with 6 guests taking part, representing 4 films that are playing at this year's festival. We have ARIEL NASR, director of The Forbidden Reel, Mira Burt-Wintonick, Wintopia, Chris AUCHTER, who's the director of the short film Now is the Time, and we have 3 co-directors of the film All I Can Say, TARYN GOULD, Danny CLINCH, and Colleen Hennessy. As I say, I'm delighted that you're all here, and thanks so much for taking the time. I wanted to start with TARYN, Colin, and Danny's film. First of all, what an amazing cache of raw material. Perhaps, Danny, you could give us a little quick synopsis of what your film is about, just so we give a good sense for those of you who haven't seen it. And I encourage you all to watch these films because they're definitely worth watching. So Danny, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about the film.
Yes, our film is about Shannon Hoon, who was the lead singer for the band Blind Melon and songwriter. And he and I were friends. I'm a photographer as well as a filmmaker, and I started out photographing around the same time they were coming up. And I kind of cut my teeth with them, hung out with them in the recording studio, went on tour, and Shannon and I were friends. And when he passed away, several years went by. And Colleen and I were working together on a project, and she was a big Blind Melon fan, and sort of encouraged me like, hey, if you're ever going to do something with this band, you got to include me because I would love to be a part of it. And we started to work on a documentary about the band many years after Shannon had passed, heading in a more traditional direction. And we received from Shannon's partner and the mother of his daughter, Nico, as well as his daughter Nico, a box full of high-8 tapes that were all shot by Shannon. And of course, I'd been around Shannon a lot, so I saw him filming all the time. We just had no idea what was in there, and what a treasure trove it was. And we realized that he was a really solid documentarian. When you're carving a film out of archival footage, there's going to be a lot of holes. And part of those holes were filled in with answering machine tapes as well that had a lot of information on them. So so we took these 5 years of his life that started before he was famous and ended on the day that he passed. And TARYN, our editor, and Colleen, our assistant editor, and also the co-directors of the film, just did an amazing job combing through the footage and crafting this film that is both has a great storyline, but is also really experimental and completely gorgeous at times as well.
I don't think I've ever seen such a complete collection of self-portraiture. It was remarkable, and but I'm sure it might have been a little bit of a blessing and a curse because you had a lot of material to go through. So tell us a little bit. First of all, how many hours? You mentioned there were there was a lot, but how did you dive into the material, and how did you decide what was in, what was out, the structure of the production?
Uh, I'll start, and then Colleen, you can jump in whenever. I think for me, I actually wasn't a fan of the band initially, so I was. It took a little bit to decide, but as soon as I saw the tapes, because documentary films take a long time, so you have to be pretty certain. And once I started watching through the tapes, they really hooked me in. And I mean, it's as you're saying, it was this unbelievably vast, obsessive document of a person and a time. And it really could have been any person. The time he was filming was really fascinating because it was this transition into the video age and the very beginning of the relationship with self-archiving and our cameras. And then on top of it, the archive had this really dramatic punctuation mark, which is that he films up until the day that he dies. So that in itself created this almost mesmerizing quality in watching the footage, because you have this understanding. So all of these, potentially these insignificant fragments, end up having a lot of meaning and weight. And so I think it was a process of trying to recreate in a condensed form for an audience what it felt like to watch through the tapes, with this understanding of how much time he had. And so I think a really big breakthrough was the structural idea of that the audience would know from the very beginning that Shannon had until October 21st, 1995. And so then the tension of just the timestamp on the footage would carry the film. And then our only job was taking this unbelievably kind of kaleidoscopic and full portrait of this person's life and trying to condense pieces. So it's like, okay, birthdays, like clearly, what are the big time markers? And then the reason why the stuff is fascinating, it was like tracing the pop culture line that included him. He would film the television. So let's make that arc present. Let's make his life arc present. What are the moments which we can mark time where an audience will be like, oh no, it's 94. And then the third was, this just this larger existential. He didn't just film his highs and lows. He was filming everything, the things that comprised a life. So how do you do that? Brushing his teeth. Why was he filming that? Let's include that, because that question is hanging in the air. Colleen, do you have anything to?
You asked how much footage we had. We had about 220 hours of video footage, and then another 30 hours of micro cassette tapes were given to us later on in the process. Yeah.
I thought the use of the audio, the answering machine audio was very interesting. And I think it's something that often archive producers and directors forget about the audio collections. And it brought a lot of, another wonderful layer to the storytelling. But I think you've described very well how you figured out the skeleton and then found all that material to work with. What was it like working together as the three of you? Because it's not often that you see three directors, so I think it'd be fun to hear a little bit about that process.
Well, I think it was great. And I think that our personalities and the skills and the things that we bring to the table were unbelievably complementary. So it was a real joy, and I learned so much through the process and have lifelong friends now. And yeah.
Anything to add, Danny or TARYN?
Oh, dear.
I unmute myself. I think we do complement each other well, and it was exciting to, in a way, we dove into it. I had a relationship with the band, and with the family, and with Shannon and everybody, and filmmaking is always teamwork. Most 99% of the time, and when you put a team together like this, and everybody has worked so hard on every level, we felt like it should be all three of us as directors, as well as Shannon. So Shannon got some credit, as well as he was our DP, which we appreciate.
Right. And
Yeah.
I noticed that in the credits, and I thought that was terrific that he got a credit because it was his shooting. What was the hardest part? I mean, I always think it's interesting to know the good and the bad and the ugly, but what was the hardest part of the process of working with this material and also trying to be true to his story and but making it as you did so beautifully? But what might have been the wrinkle on the road?
I think for me it was like, well, first of all, you're processing. I mean, I'm sure Mira will speak to this too. It's like I just know the topic of her film more clearly, but like it's someone's life, and in her case, it's her father's life. So I think you're like constantly having to try and be objective, try and understand who's going to watch this, and try and be honest too. And I think the process leading up to sharing the film with his daughter, for instance, who was in my mind cutting a lot, not to censor what was there, but just the process of understanding she would watch this and this would be a huge part of her understanding of her father, and potentially the most sustained time, I think the most sustained time she would have ever spent with him. So that was quite a weight. You know, beyond the pressure of fans and stuff, that wasn't of concern. Like there was fans that were really, but I think that was a really intense thing. And then I think just the bold decision to really fully restrict the film to the archive and going through that mourning process or that negotiation of what the consequences of that are and what has to be peace with the things that will have to be left out in order to serve and make this film really autobiographical, which was really radical, we felt, to do something from a public figure that was, I mean, who very rarely you get that opportunity in doc in general, especially with someone that's famous. So yeah, I think that for me was like, it was all the three of us all the time kind of being like, is this working? Like, is this watchable? Is this, you know, it took a while to make that true. I mean, it didn't happen overnight.
But there's something so pure about having 100% archive as opposed to having talking heads or music critics or, you know, because the, you know, record executives were there and they were talking. So, but just having the narrative line coming from the main protagonist, I found so fascinating. And I'm a huge fan of 100% archive films. So that was a wonderful experience. And I really encourage all of you who are watching from home to try and see it at the Gimli Film Festival. I'd like to move on next to ARIEL, and if you could tell me a little bit about, in just a few words, what your film is about, and then I have a few questions for you.
Sure. My film is about an archive in Afghanistan that contains the work of Afghan filmmakers who documented history unfolding from the perspective of Kabul over the entire 20th century.
And how did you, what was the inspiration for this film? What was that aha moment when you thought, I want to make this film?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, I kind of always wanted to make a film like this because growing up in Canada, but with an Afghan father, I always had that hunger for more imagery from Afghanistan, you know? And so when I was in Afghanistan, I was always looking for ways to kind of access the past because the present is so radically different from the past. So much has been destroyed. And so when I stumbled, you know, on the archive and saw it for myself for the first time, I was kind of blown away. And so I just started thinking more and more about sharing those archives with the world. And this was a way to do that.
Tell us a little bit about, because you've worked on many wonderful films about Afghanistan and how this placed in relation to the other films that you worked on.
Well, I think the longer you spend somewhere, the less you have that kind of beginner's eye and the more you need to kind of seek greater depths, you know? So I think the films that I made when I was newer to Afghanistan, because of course I was born in Canada, they were things that were a little bit more surface level, you know, a little bit more easy to access. But as I spent more time there, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the history and what was kind of underlying the current situation. I also think that I wanted to put Afghan voices somehow through my work, kind of frame them a little bit, kind of collaborate with Afghan voices. And this is a way to do that by kind of bringing these films, these feature films and documentaries that had almost never been seen outside of Afghanistan, to bring those to people's attention and do that in a way that was artful.
And you did. You surpassed everyone's expectation. How did you choose some of the characters in your film? And talk a little bit about the relationship of them with their material, or the material that they represent.
Sure. Well, I knew Engineer Latif, the central participant, for a long time. He was kind of the gatekeeper in Kabul when it came to getting film permits and that kind of thing. And as a producer and director working there, I got to know him pretty well. But the thing about Latif, Engineer Latif, is a very complex character who worked in Kabul during the entire period of the 80s when the Mujahideen were famously fighting against the Red Army. And Latif was actually working from inside communist Kabul, making films about life, about the war, but he was doing it from the perspective of communist Kabul. So a perspective that really wasn't seen very often in the West. Mm. And I loved that. And I thought that was so fascinating. But I also knew that I couldn't just tell the story from that perspective, because there were so many who, of course, were outside of Kabul who were impacted by the war. And through a little bit of research, I discovered that one of his closest friends had been fighting and documenting the fight with the Mujahideen at the time. And so it kind of made the perfect narrative to tell the whole story in a way. I mean, it's kind of focused on Kabul and that region, but it was a good way to try and bridge those two perspectives. And it turned out that they were sending films back and forth in the middle of this incredibly disastrous war. So that made for a pretty interesting juxtaposition, I guess.
And it's always interesting to me when you work with people who've become friends and that process. And was that, you said that was a good relationship. Were there any moments when you were working on your film that you wished for something that perhaps you couldn't get? Because I know a lot of the material has been destroyed, but I was amazed at everything that you had found. It was quite exciting. It was a treasure hunt in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely was. Not a whole lot is known about the archive. And so it wasn't a situation where we could kind of look at a catalog or look at a historic record and where the films were mentioned a lot and kind of go, okay, like we need this and we need that. Because of the circumstances, the films weren't very well documented. I actually spoke to the guy who was in charge of filmmaking under the communists, and he didn't know much at all, actually. And the cataloging was really at a rudimentary phase. So it was really about sitting down and talking to the archivists and saying, what do you have that shows this? Or what do you have that shows that? What do you have from this year or with this person? And that's how we did the research.
I think what's so exciting in all of your films is how you are filmmakers, but you're also archivists yourselves, because you've created this lasting moment in a lasting archive, and by preserving it and keeping it. So I've somebody who's worked with archive films for almost 40 years, I always feel like that's a part of our job as well when we work with archives is finding the material, getting it digitized, sometimes for the very first time. And so I think what you've accomplished there is fantastic, because it truly was a lost treasure that a lot of the rest of the world didn't know about. And you've brought it to the forefront, and I think you've done a marvelous job. So thank you for that. I'm going to now move on to Christopher. And Christopher, I am absolutely enchanted by your film. I've worked with the National Film Board of Canada for many, many years, and so I'm quite familiar with their archive. But I think what you did by finding this incredible footage and finding the characters you wanted to showcase. So tell us a little bit about how you came to know about the film from the 50s that was the basis for your film.
Yeah, sure. Well, this film was made. There was another version of it made in 1970. It came out, and it was done by the National Film Board, but not from a Haida lens, like a Haida perspective. And the film itself, there was a key player for the reason why the NFB was on Haida Gwaii at the time that this pole was going up and being raised. And that person was a young woman at the time named Barbara Wilson, who was part of the National Film Board's Indigenous film crew. They were teaching Indigenous people at the time in 1969, the art of filmmaking. She was a member of that team, and she raised her own money to go up to Haida Gwaii, and with her money, the National Film Board sent some of their most talented, like, cinematographers, like, it's the sound people. It was a really great team. And what she went up there actually fell through, and she didn't film what she had wanted to. It fell through at the last minute. She had the team up there, and lo and behold, it's almost like fate. She's like, well, Robert Davidson's, there's this pole raising. It's the first one in nearly a century. We should go film it. So they filmed it, and the event happened. And when they went back to Montreal, I think they were going back to Montreal to do the editing, she got pushed out. So she never got to make the decisions on what this film should be about. And she didn't even want a credit, but they gave her a credit in the film, and she didn't see the film for 49 years. And she thought, well, maybe there'll be a celebration for the 50th anniversary of some sort, like maybe a potlatch. Maybe we could give the film as a gift to the people who come. And so she asked if she could see it, and she hated it. She was embarrassed by it. So she asked Michelle Van Bussicum, one of the heads at the National Film Board of the English department, if something can be done. And Michelle said, yes, we could do a new film based on the footage. And then I stepped into the office to see if I could do a new animated film. And they said, well, we have this. Would you be interested in taking a look to see if you'd be interested in? And I saw the footage. The footage was beautiful. And just to see my community, what it was like before I was born. And then the understanding that I didn't know about this story, and it seemed like such a pivotal moment for us, that why didn't I grow up as I grew up on Haida Gwaii, and I didn't know about this story. So it became very important for me to, one, learn it inside out, what was it like during the time, learn the story, and then share it with everybody else. Yeah.
And was it difficult for you to track down the people that were in the original production to reconnect with them?
Well, I've known Barbara Wilson growing up, and so that wasn't hard. She was the first one I talked to, get her advice and stuff as well. And then Robert Davidson actually lives fairly close by, and called the area called White Rock. He has a studio there, so. That was, it was a bit of a tricky to find his number and stuff. He's quite successful and stuff. So, but I got a hold of him and I talked to him. And the hard thing was, I think, because the NFB had all this beautiful footage and it was shot on 35 millimeter film. So when they digitized it, it's just like glorious. But what they were missing is they didn't keep the audio. Other than what was baked into the original film that they had, they didn't have the audio that they recorded. They didn't keep it. So I had to hunt for, because I had questions. I was like, well, what happened to all the totem poles? And that was a major one for me. And so I searched at the BC archives and I found this beautiful story from one of the elders that actually took part, like it was a firsthand account of what happened to the totem poles. And, the way he describes it, like, yes, we cut it into 4-foot blocks, something we could carry, and they burnt them up, or, like it was, that was one of the key ingredients, was finding that audio. Because, audio is half the film, right? So you need that. So, and then also finding audio from the pole raising, so you could hear the chatter, you could hear people trying to figure out how we're going to raise this pole, because all the elders had to get together and figure out how we're going to raise this pole, because they wanted to do it in the old way. And I think that was important too, so that all the young people and the next generation can see, okay, that's how it's done. And, you start building upon that that regrowing of our culture, and that especially our artistic culture. So we need to know how to do that, how to rebuild on that. So because it hadn't been done for so long.
Well, yes, it had been a very long time since a poll had been raised. And it's interesting because I've come across that more than once where the audio is not there at the National Film Board. I think a zealous archivist decided it would clear up some shelf space, and they got rid of a lot of the 1/4-inch tapes, which is unfortunate, but a very clever way for you to go to the Royal BC to work with. So kudos to you. What has been the reaction of your community to the film? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, quite early on. I think we'd only been to one festival before that, or maybe two, TIFF and Vancouver. But it was important that we do a tour of the film on Haida Gwaii for the community. And yeah, we had one in Masset, and that one was amazing. Like it was a nighttime screening at the community hall. We screened the film, and yeah, it was just so beautiful. People at the end of the film, when lights came up, they all stood up and clapped. And I went up and I said just a short few words, and then I gave it to the floor in the hopes that some stories would come out, and they did. People would stand up and give their accounts of being there, what it was like for them to be there, or what it meant to them to be there. And it was so beautiful. There was some of our members got up near the end, and they sang one of the songs that was there. Like this was all organic. None of this was planned. It was such a moment. It was, I don't know if I ever get one of those moments again. It was beautiful. So bringing it home was key, and it was beautiful and was well accepted. So
great.
Yeah, that was kind of like the
icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Mira, I'm interested in talking to you because, as you know, I worked with your dad on a few films, and going through your father's boxes of tapes, it goes without saying, it must have been an intensely personal experience for you. And I wondered how you chose the editor to work with, because the editor obviously would be a pretty key person for you to be working with. So can you tell a little bit about how you came to the decision to make the film in the first place, and then how you put your team together?
Yeah, I guess it didn't feel so much like a decision to make the film as like this duty that I had, because it was my dad's dying wish to have a film made about his life. And it wasn't exactly clear what shape that film would take. And certainly after he died, it was clear that, we hadn't filmed anything with him while he was alive. But I remembered that we had these boxes of Utopia tapes in the basement that he had talked about, that he had spent 15 years filming over the course of his life for this unfinished film that he never got a chance to make. And so I thought, okay, that's at least some material I can use to create this portrait of him and his life. So I started digging into the tapes. And at the beginning of the project, I was working with one editor named Catherine Legault, who knew my dad and had edited Pilgrimage, which was a film I had made with my dad many, many years before. And so that was very helpful just at the beginning, to just have someone there who sort of forced me to show up in the editing room when I was in the early stages of grief as well. And but it's such a personal film, or I realized it had to become a really personal film, that I eventually started working on the film alone just for a long stretch, because I just needed to figure out what I was trying to say or what I wanted to do with the material. So I just spent a long time, many years, just working on it by myself. And then in the last stretch of the film, that solitariness was getting really difficult to just be in a dark, and especially in Montreal winters, it's dark. Being in a dark edit suite every day, thinking about my dead dad, was kind of getting a bit heavy. So I brought in another editor named Anouk Deschênes. And in thinking about who to work with, it was tricky. I wanted to find someone that was going to be pretty open to what I was trying to, just to help me make the film that I was trying to make, rather than have someone who would have a really clear vision of a different kind of film that they might want to make with the material. And she ended up being perfect because she was like sort of maybe a less experienced editor. She'd only edited one feature, but it made her a very good listener. She was really open, just to like talking things through with me. And we just spent a lot of time collaborating. And she also didn't know my dad. So that was like a really helpful perspective to have her eyes watching the same footage that I had seen or had spent many years with, to just have that perspective of how can we make this film something personal and honest and raw, but also if you don't know my dad, it's still going to be an emotional experience or an emotional story to join in on for the ride. So that ended up being a really good fit.
I thought your background in radio and podcasts and audible storytelling was the way you use the sound was exceptional. And it really, again, all of you shared in that. You bring that element to your productions in a way that makes it so much more layered and nuanced. And I thought it was a smart decision to have the interviews with Peter's friends and colleagues off camera. And was that something that you thought a lot about, or was that just something that came to you and you decided it was a good fit?
Yeah, it was something that right away I kind of knew I didn't want to ever cut away to footage that wasn't his, and I wanted to just use archival footage because each frame of this footage is, for me, is so intense and personal and like moving and weighted of being these frames that he was filming while he was alive. And I just kept picturing like him behind the camera, and I could hear him breathing and see his shadow. And so the idea of like leaving that bubble of him where he's alive and then going to some new material would have felt like such a disconnect and such like a burst of this like really precious archive that I had. So pretty much right away, I decided I just wanted to do audio interviews that would be able to, add to the film without ever leaving the archives and leaving the world of the archives. And they could just kind of float on top of the archives and the visuals and add a new layer to the story.
Yeah, it was very, very effective. Again, what was perhaps the toughest thing you had to face while you were making this film, if you want to share that?
Yeah, I mean, like the creative process and the grieving process were really so muddled together that was really just difficult in the way that, and I guess any grieving is difficult, and then trying to also make a film through that, which is making a film is already so challenging, especially, similar to All I Can Say, we had about 200 hours of footage and plus the audio interviews. And so just figuring out what to leave out, and trying to accept the fact that I would never be able to create a full portrait of my dad or really fully capture him in, 88 minutes, especially he was such a larger than life character. And so just trying to figure out like how to accept letting go of certain moments or certain scenes and just trying to, whittle everything down to its essence was just creatively really challenging. And I guess, and emotionally too, just that trying to even just give myself permission to allow it to become my film and not think too much of what he would have done with that footage. That I always was keeping that in mind, kind of jumping back and forth between putting myself in his shoes and trying to see things through his eyes, and then also trying to bring the audience into my seat of watching the footage and that feeling of a daughter watching her father through this archive. So yeah, just kind of finding that balance and the lines, and just letting myself eventually make it much more personal and kind of take more ownership of it.
Mm-hmm. And probably the length of time that you had. I mean, if you had been trying to do that to a festival deadline or something else, so the fact that you did have as much time to work on it really was a total important detail.
Yeah.
There is a question that's just come in from one of our viewers. Something that seems to come up a lot, especially in documentary filmmaking, is the ethics involved in representing people on camera. And in the case of this panel, in appropriating images. For a film like All I Can Say, what were your ethical considerations in using footage shot primarily by someone that couldn't really give his permission to you to use the footage or how it's put together? So would one of you or all of you like to answer that? And I also know that's something I'm sure you've all considered. I'm sure you thought about that, Mira, when you were talking or thinking, how is my father going to be seeing this? And all of you. So let's just take a go around the circle and answer that question. Danny.
I'm going to jump in and say that, for me, I knew Shannon, and I feel like he really he was fearless in his self documentation, and we feel like it's interesting as you watch the film. You get a third of the way through, and as you say, you feel like you're going to have a talking head's going to come in and sort of steer you in the direction of what's fact or fiction or what they remember. But here you have Shannon telling you the whole story, and every time there's a little change in the story, it's always Shannon who's telling you. And sure, I think there are ways to edit around to make it feel, differently or to have a certain point of view, but he really laid it all out there for us. So I don't feel like we had that much to worry about in terms of what he was saying. TARYN, you're on mute. Unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Hi. There you go.
There you
Sorry
go.
about that.
It's okay.
So also, we were looking for that. And documentary film is just rife with moral conflict because you're taking something that happened. And in our case, something that was happening, which it's like, it was a present tense experience, which Shannon frequently spoke to an audience. So when we were asking us these questions, when we were asking the edit these questions, it was a frequent, he would be speaking, ladies and gentlemen, there was like a projection into the future. He gave us multiple reasons why he was filming, and we left them all in. And one of them was that he was making a documentary, and the other, which is in the film, he actually, when we found this interview, it was really moving for us, as he said, the music thing's getting too serious and there's so much else that I am interested in doing. And the interviewer probed him as to what, and he said, I'm interested in getting into film. So it was actually a real intention of his. And you see him evolve as a filmmaker. And I think for us, it was an incredible act of giving agency back to him, because his story in the media and his death particularly was very, the reaction was very callous. It was kind of in the shadow of Cobain, which everything falls under the shadow of Cobain. And his loss was really not at least acknowledged by the press. And this, I think for us, Danny had a personal relationship, Colleen had a personal relationship with the band. And for me, just coming in, kind of getting to really know and love this person and feel his loss, it was giving him back his story and saying, I was someone I loved, I was destructive, I was chaotic, but I was a person trying to hold on to my life. And this is what I went through, and it's what he left. So I feel like we resolved those conflicts.
Good. And Colleen, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. You can move
on. Okay. In terms of Chris and ARIEL, did you have any of those sort of ethical, weighing of what to use, what not to use, how to use it? Maybe we'll start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, there's a lot, and a lot of it is stuff that comes from historical or political considerations and stuff that's going on now. There's a lot of powerful political actors in Afghanistan who committed war crimes in the past, who are empowered in the current regime, etc. So it was rife with ethical problems, but I think they're all invisible to the lay person, to the everyday viewer who doesn't have a lot of, but to somebody who does have a lot of knowledge about Afghanistan, I hope that we did a good job in walking that very fine line. But, yeah.
And did you have a group of advisors to work with on that, to sort of say, should I, shouldn't I, or how did you work in that context?
Yeah, I have a very large circle of Afghan filmmakers, and this was about film. It was about the filmmakers. So I drew, when I couldn't figure something out, I would go back to them, because it was really, they were the participants whose story I was telling. It was their story, Right. And very often the answer for them was beyond politics. It was about a commitment to cinema, and so that was often the thing that guided us.
Right. Good. And Christopher.
Yeah, I think it's a conscious thought to not manipulate the footage in terms of to bend it to my will of what I wanted to say, but to try to be truthful to what the actual story was telling. And that was something that was important for me, is wanting to get those the firsthand accounts that it's and wanting to be as close to the present 1969 as I could be, which is why I was quite apprehensive about getting remembering what it was like, and getting a bunch of interviews of, oh yeah, I was there, and I remember this and that. I wanted to try to get as much as I could from 1969 and that day as I could, and thank goodness I found some of those interviews that Imbert Orchard had done with the CBC, and we were able to get Robert Davidson when he was in the middle of doing it, and comments from him, just making comments from that day, so those are the raw, that it's not the perspective of retrospect from 50 years later, or even a year later. Like it's in the moment, and those living moments then, and bringing them into the light today, and having those be the ones that are speaking. It's more truthful, I think, in that way. So it's always trying to keep things truthful, and not, manipulate the footage to try to tell it in a certain light that maybe wasn't true. So I try to be ethical in that way, in the way that I use the footage. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And Mira, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I guess, I kind of realized, early on, that I couldn't make the film that my dad would have made with that footage. And also that it wouldn't be worthwhile trying to make a really glowing portrait of him that was only looking at him as like this amazing filmmaker and mentor, and not looking at him as in a full, complex, flawed human being kind of way. And so, of course, it's tricky to do, because he can't watch the film. He can't respond to any of the things that I bring up in the film, or any of the way that I portray him in the film. But I just was trying to be honest and as true as possible to my experience. And ultimately, I think I came to terms with it by understanding that he, as a filmmaker, he would never have respected like a glowing portrait, even of himself. He understands and a good film has to be layered and complex, and show people in all kinds of, in all of their shady gray zone kind of lights. And so that kind of gave me a bit of peace, that even though I can't know what he would think of the film, I think he would respect that it's honest and complicated.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a sort of a group of people that you would show the material to, or did you work pretty well in solo?
Various rough cuts to friends of my dad's, or to my mom, or to different people, and would just had this Google document of like feedback, and then try to filter it through what I felt like I needed to do anyway. So ignoring things that didn't make sense, and then things that reinforced what I was trying to do, it just helped me be like, oh yeah, I'm on the right track, and I'm just kind of refocus on that.
Yeah. Oh, it really worked. I think it was, warts and all, but it made it so much more of a true portrait. So that was fantastic. I thought it might be fun, since you have all just met, well, not entirely all of you met for the first time, but if any of you have questions for each other, because I think it's sometimes nice when you have that opportunity to ask your fellow filmmakers on this panel about anything that you wanted to find out about the making of their projects, or how they, their process, or if there's anyone there who might have a question. And then we'll also hope that we have another question coming through on our, let's see if I have another question here. No, I think that is the only one we have. So for now, hopefully there'll be some others, but do any of you have questions for each other? Colleen.
question. This was my first feature doc, so we had the experience of many, many years making the film and starting and stopping as we sort of had to align our schedules together and ran out of money and found more money. And Mira, you mentioned, for years being alone in your cave. I'm just curious, the timeline of your edit, was it a similar experience? Is that like how it is?
I mean, yeah, this is also my first film as like a director, and I spent about 5.5 years working on it. But it wasn't full time. We didn't have that much funding, and I'm a radio producer, make radio documentaries in my regular life. So I took 2 full years off from the film where I didn't look at it at all while I did radio stuff and came back to it. But it ended up being so helpful, because in that time, that's when I stopped trying to make my dad's film and came back to it with fresh eyes and was like, well, I have to totally rethink this and make it very much, it totally transformed how I approached the film. And if I hadn't had that break, I would have been still so confused. So I think I'm really grateful that it was such a slow, and there was no deadlines because we had no money. So there was no So yeah, it was just a very, and I guess because also it's such a personal film, I had to figure out the story is me figuring out how I feel about my dead dad. And that you can't rush that. Like the actual story of had to unfold just as my grief evolved and as the filmmaking evolved too. So yeah, it was very slow and kind of in little bits and spurts, and tried to let it be as what it needed to be as much as possible.
I think one of the questions that I know some people might have is the financing for a film, because 2 of them were intensely personal, and then others were historical, and making sure that a voice and a film was made to preserve a certain period in time. Maybe you could each talk a little bit about how that came together, because that's something that I know a lot of the people who are watching, directors, producers, archival producers, and researchers, might be interested to find out how you put these together. Who'd like to start?
I'll just say Colleen actually lived on an air mattress underneath my lofted bed in Brooklyn for 7 months for one part of it. Honestly, she's one of my best friends in the world now, so I'm so grateful. But this stuff is the people are not like knocking down your door with lots of cash.
It was a twin size air mattress.
And Danny was like really behind the scenes. I mean, I think Colleen and I's financial decisions were just based on like, okay, when can we take kind of like some financial hits, and when do I really need to get paid? And then Danny can speak to he was like hitting the pavement trying to find that cash. I was figuring out when the time I had to give where I didn't need to get paid a lot.
Yeah. I mean, my thought, as all of us know, it's for the passion of the project. That if you're going to dive into a documentary, you really got to be really up for it and really passionate about it. We started making this film, Colleen and I, like 14 years ago, and we did a Kickstarter campaign, and we raised $100,000, and people thought, oh, they raised $100,000. This is, going to be out tomorrow, and like, we weren't even close. I mean, we weren't even close. And 99.9% of our supporters were supporting all the way through. And every once in a while you get a hater on there who just probably doesn't understand what it takes to make a film. And I'll give them that benefit of the doubt, because people don't know. And it really is, there's so much to, especially when you're doing a music film, there's publishing, there's master. You're like, wait, I have to pay a publishing and a master fee, and where all these fees are coming. And if the lawyer's going to write a little something, wait, well, how much does that cost? And like, I just remember first getting into film and hearing somebody say like, it's a small budget film and they have like $1 million. And I'm just like, what? You can't make a film for $1 million? And then documentaries are, of course, a whole different ballgame. But we all know that it's a passion project first. And then you do have to pound the pavement. You do have to, I was hitting up every friend of a friend, everybody I knew who had maybe an outside chance that they had a link to someone who wanted to be a part of something really meaningful and really cool. And I have to say, I was just disappointed over and over and over again as to somebody, just saying like, nah, or just trying to, get support from some people who you thought might be able to come through for you. But it is, and in respect to the people that said no, you are taking a chance to never see your money again.
And one of the questions that's just come in is how can you elaborate a little bit about whether the fans embraced it or what do they think of the film?
Oh man, Colleen's been on.
Yeah, Colleen's she's embedded a little bit.
They really
keep an eye on all the chat rooms. Yeah, I mean the real fanatical fans that have been following Shannon and Blind Melon for so long have just been waiting and waiting, for 14 years in some cases for this film. So they're really happy. And we just finally released online June 26th through virtual cinemas, and everybody outside of the film festival circuit got a chance to stream it in their own homes. And we are so happy with the response, and they are so happy. I can't really, the only complaint I've seen is that they wish they had more music in the film, which we knew that was going to happen. And we knew that this was going to be a film about the person and not the band. So it was a sacrifice that we made in the edit. But yeah, the response has been really, really positive.
And I would just quickly add that of course, that's an important piece, but I think for us, all the three of us as filmmakers and just as humans, that the process of the band watching it and the family watching it, and that, as Christopher was describing, the kind of unmatched feeling when there's like that kind of like connection across time. And that to be a part of that, it's one of the most memorable things of my life, is sitting in a room with his daughter and his sister and his partner and watching that together with them and having them connect so deeply and feel their lost loved one in that way. And so if that was it, all of us kind of after we were like, okay, if the thing never comes out, that was all right. That's fine. That was the reason. We just did it. That's okay. That might be it. Cheers.
And ARIEL, did you have a chance to have a group screening with a lot of your filmmakers? Did you have?
We took it back to Afghan Film, and we screened it in the little internal cinema there. And about 80 people showed up, way more than we expected, and people just watched with this expression on their face that I can't describe. I took pictures, just like really. Really engaged, and afterwards there was a long series of speeches, and it was a celebration. Actually, that's what it was. The next day we had planned to do something with VIPs, because for VIPs you have to do it in like a secure place. So we had booked this with the Serena Star, and that went less well. We had there was massive flooding, and then there was an attack on the hotel. Not an actual attack, but somebody had called, and there was some kind of rumor that there was an attack. So that was kind of a failure. But the day before with the participants and the filmmakers was it was incredible. So yeah, so like Karen said, it was really a moment that I'll treasure forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a special surprise for the end of this wonderful panel. I have just been sent the announcement that Christopher has won the Best Canadian Short Film Jury Prize as part of this year's Gimli Film Festival for your film, Now is the Time. So congratulations from all of us. And I think it's a wonderful way to find out this news with a group of filmmakers around you.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you. Wow.
So I think that's a high note to end on, and I really want to thank everyone for participating and taking the time to remember the process and to remember all of your memories. And I want to ask everyone who's watching from home if you can please stay and watch the next screening, which is shorts number 3, A Pale Blue Dot. It's a collection of 7 short programs focusing on the ethics of extraction and how capitalism and colonization establish an ethos of exploitation. But there's also flowers. So first, thank you all very, very much. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you next year. Thanks so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. It's nice to meet everybody.
You
Bye.
bet.
You too.
Okay. Thank you.